that spin here for a second. All righty. Coming to you guys live here on a Thursday with This Week in Drones. We've got some exciting topics. And as we are live here together, as people are kind of coming into the feed, as usual, if you have anything that you guys want to address or ask of this great panel with DJ Smith joining in his role with drone responders and his background with Virginia State Police and all the work he's done with counter UAS. And we're going to get a big update and kind of deep dive with him on all sorts of things, man. DOW policies that are coming down that can be applied to us, like commercial, state, and local folks. But anyway, we'll get into a whole conversation. Meanwhile, Michelle, one of my besties, here, having fun jet setting around the world and making waves. But I will actually pass it to Michelle. I mean, most of you who view the podcast know who we are. All three of us are at this point. But Michelle, I'll let you toss out a little intro, tell people what you're up to, how they can work with you even. And like, I'd love to hear a little bit about your amazing graphic back there, because that was a fun conversation backstage. And then after Michelle, then I'll pass it to you, DJ, and you can share a little bit, just a backdrop for folks, kind of where you're at, you know, kind of the hat you're wearing on this, the perspective you're bringing, and then I'll kick us off on some topics. But yeah, Michelle, take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you, David. It's great to be back on This Week in Drones. I've missed it. Michelle Duquette. I run a small boutique consulting firm, just me, 3 Mad Air, MAD, Michelle and Duquette. I am right now working across the board, really. I mean, all of the conversations we've had on this podcast have been very meaningful, and we're starting to really identify the seams. So we're very focused on drones. However, we know now drones touch absolutely everything, and they're coming into places where these folks are needing a hand. And so I have been really focused lately on helping people with a drone mission to be able to focus on their mission while I kind of work the seams, you know, the periphery for them, because these adjacent sectors are bringing in wrinkles that they're not anticipating. So it's always helpful to be able to anticipate ahead of time, plan for it, be strategic, not just technically, but also with your budget, so that you're not retrofitting. And we all know that's way more expensive than doing it from the beginning. So I work with the state governments. I work with the EIPP programs, with service suppliers and public safety. And, you know, basically, we're all trying to do this together because we only have one national airspace system. And so my perspective is I show up and I try and be part of that rising tide that helps us get to enterprise so that we can scale in a meaningful way. My graphic behind me is, this is Michelle's doodling in her brain, doing it in a little digital art. It's a mound of paperwork that is still required, even though we've reduced. I mean, before, the paperwork was way bigger than a screen, but we've reduced it. But there's still quite a bit of paperwork to get through in order to get these things flying normalized beyond visual line of sight in all the mission sets that are out there. And if you can see that there's a lot of like dots around, those are electrical nodes. It's just how the drone community touches all the different sectors. And then there's a whole city out there of missions that are just waiting for the drone technology benefits and values. And yet we're kind of still in a bubble. That's the bubble that's behind me. And this is what drives me every day. We need to figure out how to get that translucence of the bubble to just disappear and reduce that paperwork so that it becomes part of the norm. And that's my goal. And it's to help people position themselves for that to happen.
Beautiful. Well, thanks for joining us, Michelle. Appreciate it. And folks, remember, we are streaming to you live. If you're watching this live, feel free to toss in questions as we go through a list here that I'm gonna pass it to DJ just to give a quick backdrop. Whatever you'd like to share about what you're up to right now, and Also, the kind of overall topic that I summed up from a couple of our points we were going to address is just discussing state and local resources for drone mitigation. Like, what do we do about a nefarious drone, if we see it fly over a World Cup match or whatever the case, if we're a state and local support for that? And, getting into like some of the policies, whether it's like the Department of War policies flowing down, how do we apply those on a commercial or SLTT level, or things like 2209? I'd love to get your opinion of that, like the whole UAFR, applying for flight restrictions over top of some of these critical infrastructure sites, and just where that's at. And, we can deep dive those. But yeah, I'll pass to you, DJ. Just to love to hear about you a little bit, what you're up to these days. Didn't quite retire as you were thinking with your new nice beautiful house out there.
Yeah, never going to retire, man. Hey, thank you. And Michelle, you're always a hard act to follow. The lovely Michelle is one of my favorite people in the world. So I made fun of her graphic. I'm like, I got to get a cool graphic. I mean, I've got all this stuff from my office. My wife said to bring home and get put out somewhere, but don't put it everywhere. So no, I officially did retire from state police after 31 years in law enforcement, 3 years as a police officer, and 27, almost 28 years with, actually 28 years with VSP. So went on to work for Amazon. So I'm still with Amazon. I've moved roles now. I'm over helping educate and help us get a better understanding of the airspace above all of our facilities relating to drone threats or any kind of airspace threat. Like every company is, we're just trying to understand what it looks like, what we need to be concerned about. And that extends to all of our facilities around the world. I work with some of the smartest people in the world. Steve Schmidt, our CISO, I believe that's what it's called, one of the smartest human beings on the planet. So he's efforting that and pushing all these things down, and with AI and a manager, and I'm overwhelmed by the intelligence that Amazon does have within their staffing. So a lot of the things that we're talking about, we're still talking about things we've talked about for about 10 years. So we're finally in a posture now where things are moving very rapidly. So we're actually, policy's moving. They're wanting to do things. The problem is we're moving a little faster than we need to actually build the road under the car. So the car has been pushed down the hill. Now we're trying to build the road under the car and try to figure out what the policy looks like. I think we're getting better at that. We have an administration that's very amenable to what safe and legal flight in the national airspace looks like and what we need to secure the homeland. A lot of policies coming down now are centric around what our federal partners are doing and what works at the federal level. We end up forcing ourselves sometimes into a round peg square hole scenario, as we talked about earlier, where we try to fit a federal regulation or federal guideline or Department of War guideline or rule or policy into the SLTT framework or the critical infrastructure framework. My eyes have really been opened on the critical infrastructure side. Amazon has a lot of pieces and parts that actually fall into that category. So I start, when I was on the U.S. Chamber Working Group, I started hearing from chemical companies down in Louisiana and their concerns about drones flying over and stealing intellectual property and intellectual manufacturing techniques and all the things that cost the U.S. economy billions of dollars a year. Now I'm where I'm at now, and I see a whole different layer of that as well, where we all need to be concerned about the airspace. So the policies that are being crafted need to have two additional voices at the table that I still don't think are fairly and equitably recognized for the importance that they have and the impact they have in this space, which is the SLTT public safety. They need to hear from state, local, tribal, territorial as to what we need and how we need to fix these problems, what the policy needs to look like for us. And the SLTT, which I'm not in anymore, but my heart always will be there. And then the critical infrastructure voice, not manufacturing as far as drones and all that, but actually hearing from plants like power companies and power grid and service providers and all the stuff that when anything happens to those, there's a ripple effect downstream to everybody else across the country. Their voices need to be at the table because there are specifics within each industry that need to be addressed individually. So maybe what the power industry needs is not what data center needs. Maybe what data centers need isn't the same as chemical factories. I think any policy that gets written without a strong impact from those voices is going to be it's going to be fallible. It's going to be incomplete and possibly not necessarily roll out like we need it to. And I don't mean that as a knock against our federal partners. Our federal partners doing everything they can do right now to secure the homeland, doing the best thing it can do. I'm just saying there are some voices. Charles and I have had a lot of conversations, Charles specifically with the White House and a lot of our policymakers in DC about, hey, the SLTT factor needs to be at the table when you're crafting these. Critical infrastructure is why it's called critical infrastructure. If it goes down or there's a ripple effect, it affects other industries downstream. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm excited to be doing the things I'm doing with Amazon. I feel very blessed to have the job I have. and work with some of the amazing people I do with Amazon. So from that, I'll just kind of kick it back to you there, Dave, with the weather.
Yeah, no, that was killer, man. I mean, it makes me think of how valuable drone responders is with Charles and those sorts of working groups that become that bridge, right? And like literally represent the voices of SLTT and law enforcement to the Hill. So that's a great point. Before we deep dive, I'm going to bring up the one, the only Joshua Lewin to stage. Hey, Josh, how you doing?
Doing well. Good to see you, DJ. It's been a little while.
Always good to see you. Same here, Josh. Hey, did you read all those books behind you, or are they just for decoration? Tell me the truth.
A lot of them. Not.
Is it real? Is it an AI backdrop, or is it real? Show us.
It's real. It is. It's very real. I got the handkerchief from some folks at FIFA. Dave and I got to interview some of them, and they gave us some swag. So I have that hanging up still. So I'll have to take it down after the game, so it won't be as cool.
Well, yeah, check out our interview with GB Jones back in the archives from FIFA Security. That was a good one. All right, so, well, Josh, you want to do just a quick intro, what basically you and I are up to on the Echodyne side, like, in terms of, whatever you want to share. Go for it. And then
great. Great being here. Really excited to talk with you, DJ. I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening, not just in the world with the police, but also you had mentioned critical infrastructure. I've been spending a lot of time in Texas and Houston, on Freeport, Port of Corpus Christi, all along the coast there. And a lot of the folks in the ports, the tenants and the ship channels are all very concerned about drones, especially with what we've seen happening in the Middle East and in Russia, Ukraine. I think people are starting to wake up to that risk factor that kind of long range, weaponized drones can truly bring to our critical infrastructure sites along the coast. So definitely what you said really resonated, and I think it'll be it's a topic that needs to be shot out a little bit more, just to bring some awareness, because I feel like we are at a transition point where people are starting to take this threat a lot more seriously. So I'm excited to continue the conversation with you.
Well, actually, yeah, and I'll segue into your first point that we talked about earlier on DOW policies fitting into, or how SLTT can apply them, right, as they come from that DOW framework. But I mean, kind of spinning off of what Josh just said, I'm getting more requests lately for radar detection, looking outbound, looking for inbound targets that are larger drones, just like Josh said. And that's pretty interesting that, that's kind of the concern overall. Some of these commercial data centers are getting targeted overseas in a way that's pretty significant, that may not be happening right now. Stateside is not happening stateside, which is great, but it's still the same companies that are getting impacted. So they're really starting to think and apply, drone detection, and curious about, well, what are we allowed to do if a drone flies over our data center, our port, our airport, our stadium, if we're not the, DHS or FBI or one of these folks, like how do we, what are the policies and plans and equipment that we can use? So with that, all right, we got like 3 or 4 deep dive points. First one, DJ, I'd love to kind of just get your take, or give us some context on how DOW is basically creating the framework that needs to be applied by state and local for how to deal with drones, and how that can be challenging. How do we bridge that gap? Is there a gap between like what the policies look like, how they're written, that might apply to like a Air Force base or something, and if that's the same policy that an electric utility or port needs to apply at their local jurisdiction? Or give us some context on that. I was curious.
So I think Northcom is kind of taking the lead on everything counter UAS for CONUS. So everything here in the United States. I think this administration has really kind of tasked the Department of War to actually start looking at this problem and start figuring out how we address it here to secure the homeland. So you have a huge presence at DOW, and those guys, they've done it overseas for years. So they do have a lot of white papers. They have a lot of examples, a lot of wins that translate well for us to learn better about the technology, but also about how we defeat. So the problem we have is there's a lot of policy and everything. Here's the ironic thing. All policies start federal, trickle down, but every national security threat starts local and moves to a national security issue. Okay, so it's kind of this reverse flood. The problem starts local and is brought to the national level, and the policies start national and brought down. So we've got to figure out a better way to actually make policies that actually, again, have that voice. SLTT, public safety, And now I'll say critical infrastructure are the most affected and least heard. So, and I don't mean that in a negative way, like they're purposely trying to block us out. I just think there are so many moving parts in DC with different agencies, FCC, FAA, DOJ, DHS, all these different agencies that have to make a bill, an NPRM, that it has to pass through everybody's hands for agreement on what needs to move forward, which I'm sure has got to be just an undaunting. Steve Willoughby is my hero, because I don't know how he navigates that world daily. And I kid him all the time, but I'm like, he still has a head of hair. I don't. And it's like, obviously he handles it a lot better. But I'm glad he's in that seat, because he's the person we need in that seat right now to be that conduit between SLTT public safety and the federal guidelines, because he gets it. He speaks cop because he's actually done that work. So that's just what.
Do you have any specifics for folks that haven't like deep dived the wording off of some of the policies, and like, can you give an example of a policy that might be a little challenging to apply to SLTT that ends up getting handed down, or just a hypothetical or whatever the case, just to kind of, so we could needle into like, all right, where's the gap, and then how do we as an industry try to bridge that, right? If you have any examples.
Yeah, so let's just look at speed of action. Okay, speed of action. If you have a policy that states we have to notify the federal government when something happens, and we have to have them respond out to it, speed of action at the SLTT level has to be much faster. We have to get from response to recovery a lot faster than we can wait for somebody to show up. You'll hear people complain about that during hurricanes and all that stuff. When it comes to the drone threat, if we have to wait for authority or to make 3 or 4 phone calls up to our federal partners to coordinate an effort to stop a threat, it's just not feasible. We talked about radars a second ago, and Echodyne makes probably one of the best radars by far in the world. The longer out you can see that threat coming, the longer I have to determine intent. Okay, so if I can determine intent and actually neutralize that threat and have time to make the best decision, but at the SLTT level, if you're at a concert, a fair, or any kind of large soft target with a lot of people, you don't have a lot of time to say, yeah, it could be little Johnny, or it may be somebody else flying that drone directly towards the venue. So there's an example of we need those authorities to come down to SLTT to have autonomous thought process to say, I saw it, I identified it, I said it was a threat, I mitigated it. And again, a lot of the stuff that's coming out of DC right now is centered around, I'm all for the regulation. I think there needs to be a standardized regulation. I think that, Mike Torphy's school down there in Alabama is probably the best way to do it. Those guys wrote the book and cut their teeth on most domestic counter UAS response. But we've got to figure out a better way to make that regulation, that regulatory authority fit the SLTT. So we don't have staffing personnel and budgets like our federal partners do. And I learned that a lot of our federal partners don't have the budget we seem to think they do either. Mike Torphy did most of everything he's done on a fairly small budget, but he's been very successful at what he does. So to give you, I guess, the overarching policy of how we actually respond to drone threats gets problematic when you're looking at it from the SLTT, because we're short-staffed as well. So I'm trying to give you a better example to make it make more sense.
I mean, speed to action, that's tremendous, right? Like, if you just took us into the real world, if we can actually detect a drone coming in because we have the equipment and can validate, oh, that's definitely a drone. Maybe we get eyes on with the camera. Oh, it definitely has a payload. It's inbound towards us. We're a concert happening. That's a concern. We're still talking about minutes at best, maybe even seconds at that point, or 30 seconds or 45 seconds or a minute or whatever, that lead time ends up being once it's a validated true threat, right? Because you can't just kind of shoot at a potential target. It might just be who knows what it is, like a media drone or another law enforcement drone or a flock of geese or something, right? Until you actually know for a fact, you have to validate it's a threat, and then you have a very short amount of time to do something. But if all you can do is pick up the phone and call somebody and leave them a voicemail or something, or even get them on the phone right away and tell them, hey, we got this inbound and we have 30 seconds to do something. If the person standing there on the ground doesn't have a capability to quote unquote do something at that moment, that's challenging, right? And I've kind of thought about, like, could some of the folks that have gotten training with, the FBI training center you mentioned, some of these state law enforcement agencies, could they like coordinate with, maybe do like a dispatch center almost or something, to where they like tie in the most critical nuclear plants or whoever kind of negotiates with them on a short list? Maybe it's those who actually take the time to get the flight restrictions with the FAA with 2209 when that comes out. in other words, like short list down to the folks that are serious, that have the capability, the equipment and everything, and maybe do like a sort of like a real time instant kind of dispatch to be like, ping us, we'll validate through whatever, we'll link into your software or something, and then we'll push the button or something like that. I mean, I'm just like dreaming, how do we take what we have now and make that response time, instant? But anyways, me rambling, that's kind of, I think you made a great point.
And think, David, I don't know, DJ, maybe if you would want to speak to this. I've seen some communities, so like ship channels are a good example, where you have the sheriffs who are kind of like controlling the entire ship district, and then you have a lot of tenants who might be folks eligible for that kind of critical asset that needs to be protected, where maybe everybody kind of uses like a hub and spoke, where you have the sheriffs in the middle who can actually mitigate, and all the detection technology that all the different tenants of that port will have, being the ground coverage, and then you have that person in the middle being the sheriff who can actually make that mitigation call, versus maybe a centralized national one. You could have a little bit more local to the folks in that area. But I've seen that happening in conversation with some of these different districts and those channels.
No, I think you're right. So I think everybody's okay with, if the federal government wants to set up the procedures, the response, the guardrails, and reporting, all the things that are going to go along with this authority. Okay, so you put them through the school, you put our people through the school, critical infrastructure, it needs to be included in that at some point as well. You put them through the school, you authorize them, you train them, you certify them, you have the annual checks, the reporting requirements in place. And I don't mean this to be ugly, but do that and then get out of the way. Okay, I know my state, I know my jurisdiction, I know a lot better than some of our federal partners do. I need you there absolutely as our federal partners. But if you authorize me to use this technology and you're okay with the training that you set up and I've actually passed and qualified for it, get out of the way and let states do, and let SLTT do what they do every day, which is to protect and keep their communities, states, and safe across the board. Again, that sounds harsh, but that's just the frustration you're seeing from Governor Landry. That's why he passed a law in his state to mitigate drones, because absent of any movement out of DC, he's like, look, I have a mandate to protect my citizens in the state of Louisiana. Okay. You're seeing Tom Cotton's bill that he's trying to push forward as well. You're seeing other states that are trying to push similar legislation. We tried to in Virginia. You can absolve people of state liability, but you can't absolve at the state level somebody of federal liability. So if we fix that at the federal level, the whole thing with remote ID, I think, took away the whole issue of decoding. If I have to transmit that data by law because I launched my drone from the ground into the ether, airspace, whatever you want to call it, I'm supposed to transmit remote ID. That's the same data I need to detect, track, and classify through the airspace. That lowered the bar in my mind legally, so that you shouldn't have to have a carve out for that. I should be able to intercept that signal. Now, where it gets hinky is where I have to break that signal open, pull the data out, and extrapolate it like an electronic interception. And again, I did wiretaps for 26 years. I understand that, but we need to fix that. And I think critical infrastructure can be that key component as well. Let them to see what's over the airspace. If they can see it, then they can change their security posture on the ground, remove intellectual property, protect their property rights, whatever the case is. I'm not saying mitigate. Mitigation will be such a small, minute piece of any counter-UAS approach. And most people, that's the first thing they go to, is shooting a drone down. But let everybody know what's above our heads, create a common operating picture. And Michelle and I've had this conversation many a time. Deliveries, advanced air mobility needs that same picture. So it's the same coin, two sides, the same solution that fixes all of those. And we push forward with advanced air mobility projects as well. And sorry to sound like a bumper sticker, but that's what we're looking at.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I say this all the time. We only have one national airspace system. We only have one. So we have to figure out how to make all things work at the same time, all in the same place. And we're able to do that. We do that today with the variants of different operators that we have. I have every faith that we'll be able to do it with drones. But when it comes to public safety, there are nuances that are different than everyone else. So public safety's got two paths here. They've got what we've been talking about, which is hey, there's a bad guy, and we need to have the authority to be able to address that risk, that threat right now, in the moment. I'm going to come back to that. The second thing is also using the drone as as a tool in their toolbox to be able to build efficiencies into their existing processes that has nothing to do with mitigation, right? It's surveilling a crime scene. It's eyes on overwatch of an accident site. I mean, there's a number of things that they are finding efficiencies in drones through. But the bottom line is they already know how to take on a new technology and be responsible with it, how to bound that through policy and training. I mean, not every cop pulls his gun out every day. Not every cop pulls his or her taser out every day. Not everyone uses their cuffs every day. Yet they are tools that they've been given in order to stop a threat. And this is no different. They should be allowed the autonomy to be able to make that critical decision in the moment of which tool is most appropriate for that particular threat. And in some cases, yeah, they are going to have to mitigate another drone. And we have the technology now. We are learning by doing right now with the World Cup. We understand how federal, state, and local work together in order to make that happen. So between the training that's happened down in Huntsville with Torfy's teams and what's happening in real life right now, I just don't understand why we still have to have so many layers of authority approval before that cop on the ground can make a decision.
Brilliant. And DJ, does that kind of lead into this AG letter that just got released and clarified in the last couple of days, right? Regarding some sort of like a shift towards being able, the state and local to be able to operate with some liability, kind of offset, but it's a little bit of a challenge, right? Because it was more of like a nice idea, but not necessarily the legal coverage necessary for a state local law enforcement agent to actually have the federal piece waived that you mentioned, if they were to mitigate a drone. But anyway, I'm not saying it very well, but what tell us about this AG letter and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so the way we read it was given autonomy to the SLTT Public Safety to actually take mitigation measures against a threat that they deem a threat between now and December. We're still waiting for the rules to be crafted. So this administration, again, I'm glad this administration is very keen to understanding the threat and giving authority down to the SLTT level. The problem is it just said they probably won't prosecute, is the way we read it. So if it said we're not going to prosecute, I think everybody would have felt a lot better. The other problem is that it opened the door for potential for a lot of misfires. Okay, because given SLTT blanket authority to mitigate, and I'm not saying it gave blanket authority across the board, it just said if you deem the situation necessary to actually do it. To be honest with you, SLTT Public Safety will do that anyway. If there's a threat coming in that poses a threat to people or an imminent threat to a location, they're going to take whatever action they deem necessary to actually stop the threat. That's just what law enforcement signs up, and that's the oath they took to protect people and property. The problem with that is if any misfires, I think would have the potential to push us backwards. So I'm glad that the recent ruling came out yesterday from DOJ and DHS, kind of refining that authority for SLTT, kind of giving us a little bit more guardrails as to what it looks like and how we do it, because we need to have, I'm a firm believer. I don't think mitigation needs to go across the board for everybody. I don't think that. I think there needs to be that tool in the toolbox to remove something from the airspace kinetically when you cap to, because look, jamming and defeating is becoming less useful because there's no C2 to jam if it's flying by fiber optic or it's flying by 5G. You can jam the 5G, but what other ancillary issues do you have? Plus you're jamming all the cell phones in that area as well. So there's a number of different reasons why we need better technology and better approaches. Should we be able to mitigate? Yeah, I just think we need to set the rules like Torfy and them have done. The problem is we're just in that cycle right now where we can't get enough people through a school to make a huge difference across the country. And those guys are literally working their fingers to the bone to spin out as many people as they can. And again, I go back to the thing, we're going to have mishaps. I don't think we'll have huge mishaps, but we're going to have issues where somebody flies into a no-fly zone and we mitigate. And maybe they didn't want their drone mitigated or they get seized or whatever the case is. We've got to work through these so that we can create better laws at the SLTT level based on federal regulation that make us all more effective. But ahead of this, and Dave, and I know Michelle, and you've all heard me talk about this before, we have a huge education gap ahead of this, though. We have a whole group of society that doesn't even know the regulations behind safe and legal flight. And I think the federal government can step to the plate and fix that. One of the things I preach all the time is control what you can control. You can control education. I can make my employees and my people smarter about what drones are and what they're not, what is counter UAS and what it's not. You all know about the case we had in Rockingham County, Virginia. It was the first case going to court really to prosecute a drone offender. And we were very, very concerned about making sure that the prosecutor, Hannah, knew exactly what she needed as far as all that's concerned. The judges understood what drones are and counter UAS is, so that we get a good prosecution. It was a great case. The Mike Schenk, the investigator, did a phenomenal job. Hannah did a great job. But that education piece is probably as much, if not more, critical, because that solves 90% of your problem right there. If the careless and clueless know they're not supposed to do it, then they don't. So that kind of mixed together two thoughts, Dave. I apologize for that. But I think at the end of that education piece, we have got to get to what I call day one. And the day one needs to be, look, we just did 18 months of education. As of July 1st, 2027, 2028, whatever the case is, these are the rules of the road. And unfortunately, if you violate these rules, it's going to be mitigate your drone, take your drone, you're going to be charged, civil fine, whatever the case is that fits that situation individually. And then we move forward, because then from day one, we can start building out advanced air mobility. Charles wanted me to bring up one good point, which is the whole UTM for UAS and prioritization for public safety. We can start building that out, because then anything that violates the airspace now can be mitigated, and we're moving on. Removed from the airspace. Hey, I'm sorry. We just did 18 months of education. It's just like speeding. You can say, I didn't know I wasn't allowed to speed, but ignorance of the law doesn't make a defense of the law. And that sounds extremely harsh to some people, but we have got to do that today. And I think if absent of doing that, we're not going to be able to move forward meaningfully and start building out, UTM, advanced air mobility. DFR programs right now are suffering from the same lack of airspace contiguity as our FAA folks like to call it. So if we can fix those issues, we can start moving forward with all these things. DFR is not just a police program. It's a program for everybody. Companies want to use it to survey their construction projects. They want to use it around security perimeter fences to actually survey intrusions, maybe to have it slew to cameras and slew to parts of the fence that we can put a drone on that. It saves money. It saves personnel. It saves safer time. 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of nowhere, somebody doesn't have to drive out and see the guy that just cut a hole in the fence and get shot. Put a drone overhead. I'd rather sacrifice a tech over somebody's life any day. And again, sorry, I digressed into several topics there, but it all moves together in the same. They all touch each other, I guess is what I'm saying. Sorry.
So what you just did is you have proven yet again how valuable your insight is.
How about that?
You have just touched on that seam between commercial operations and public safety and national security. And in my world, those seams are super critical to us being able to figure out how to move forward. It is a drone as a service. And it doesn't matter if it's public safety or if it's critical infrastructure or if it's pipeline inspection, it doesn't matter what it is. It's the same kind of capability. There will be some levels of cyber resilience that are a little bit higher than others, depending on the sensitivity of the mission. But it's basically the same kind of capability. The difference that I find for public safety is that their nuances, the dynamics are so great that trying to approach them like we approach massive national security issues or commercial operations doesn't quite fit. It's not flexible enough. So you guys already have, I brought up, a cop doesn't pull his gun out every day. But if they do, and there is some question about the judgment of that officer, you have a process. after the fact, there is a process to hold that person accountable for the decision that they made. And you all abide by that process. It's the same thing on the public side, where if somebody is speeding and, perhaps there is there is a reason, there's a process after. You get caught for speeding and then you plead your case. Whether you are in a medical emergency or you just like speed like me, there is a process to hold you accountable for the decision that you make. What we're not allowing is public safety to be held accountable for the decisions that they make with drone mitigation. And we need to get over that. We've identified the training, we've set the framework for the use. Now it's time to, kick the kids out of the nest and let them do. And then if there are course corrections that need to be made after the fact, you have precedents for those kinds of processes. Let's just use them and help people get smarter. And the same thing applies to the general community. Yeah, they know they're not supposed to be flying their drones there, and they're doing it anyway. So we're already on the path to trying to hold them accountable. There is a massive amount of training and education that still needs to happen. You and I have talked about this for so many years now, and it's still in play. We're not done yet. So I think those two things, if we can just get to the other side, I think we'd be in a much better place now.
Yeah. Yep. That's a great way to frame it. I'm hopeful that some of this real world experience here with the World Cup was that positive pressure. The inverse of a 9/11 event. It was a positive economic driver that everybody's excited about and talking about, and it's bringing all kinds of really cool things to our cities. Meanwhile, funding phase one already came through. A little late, but it came through right at the last minute, and some of that equipment got shipped for protecting the World Cup games right in each of these cities. And then we got phase two of that funding unlocking here sometime around October. So that's exciting because that helps provide, as our title states, resources for state and local for these things to be able to buy equipment and get training, do all that. So I'm hopeful that some of those lessons learned that you mentioned, Michelle, will come from this actual real world hands-on, that they may count this as a little bit of a practicum stage, in the education process, the hands-on portion, right? The mentorship, because these SLTT folks are getting to work hand in glove with DHS, with FBI, depending on which city each of those folks was assigned, right? They're kind of running, FBI running certain cities, DHS, others, and then I haven't been on the ground. I don't know, DJ, if you've heard, kind of how that handoff, how that handshake is working, and some of the education opportunities between the federal and state. But I'd be just interested overall to know the positive impacts coming from, the real world experience. And then Zab Nadler, I see your question. I haven't forgotten about you, brother. We'll shift gears and get to that here in a minute, but thanks for being patient out there and interacting. But yeah, DJ, what do you think about just some of those thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of good positive wins with the SLTT and our federal partners. We already worked well together as it was before that. One huge point that just kind of reminded me when you said that is the rules of engagement. So we need to make sure whatever rules of engagement come out, it's the same that DHS operates under, that DOJ operates under, that SLTT operates under, because that way it doesn't create any confusion across the board for everybody. So whatever we come up with, we need to make sure that policy is the same across the board. So we're not trying to figure out, well, the feds can do this, we can't do that. So if there are going to always be a little bit of higher level authority they're going to have at the federal level that we probably will have. But I back to the FIFA thing, I've heard a lot of wins. I know in the NCR for the 250th American 250th coming up, Sean Polster has been spearheading a lot of that equipment engagement up there and stuff like that. A lot of good positive things with DOW working well with DHS, and DHS working well with the MWCOG group, and working together to put a simplified GUI where all this data comes in and everybody has a common operating picture on the screen of all the sensor data and effectors, so that we all know what's happening when it's happening at the same time, versus this, we bought this company, we bought that company, but the APIs don't talk, and there's an issue with that. I haven't heard any of that, which is extremely encouraging. One thing I would hope to gosh that would come out of this is that we share the white papers, we share the wins, we share the losses too, the things that didn't go well. So that if this piece of technology didn't integrate well with this one, let's put it out there. So when this other $250 million goes out in October, we know what to pair together, what works together, or maybe let that company know you got to fix this issue, because if you don't, nobody's going to be buying it because it doesn't work with these other three vetted technologies that have worked really well. Because we all know it's going to be layered. We all know it's going to be different companies layered on top of each other, because no one company does that. We are seeing a huge amount of integrators coming out of the woodworks now. There's a lot of companies that are integrators, not sellers of products. They just integrate everybody's product into something that you can buy from them. And for some state, local, tribal, territorial, that makes it easier for the procurement, because I don't have to do a procurement request. I can just do one from this company. They do all the back end FCC licensing, all the stuff like that, because God knows, Dave, the FCC licensing on your stuff can be a can of a pain in the butt sometimes on those radars. But I will say the FAA has done a phenomenal job at speeding that process up, so that's helped. So yeah, like I said, a lot of wins, but I don't just want to hear the wins. I want to hear what didn't work. If you have a ground chaser team and you had a policy in place where we had our ground chaser teams operating in this way and it didn't work, we pivoted and went back to this way, and we partnered with our federal partners, and this actually worked every time we deployed it. I want to know that, so that not just for other SLTT, but that's going to translate well to security forces on the private side. Critical infrastructure, airports, data centers, chemical factories. If that works well that way, let's translate that data all the way down so that we all become smarter. And then maybe all of our rules engagement can be similar across the board between public and private. And, we talk about that a lot, but I think there's a lot of ways that we can partner together and make that work.
Well, we'll talk about the path to speeding up response time. That's a big one, is if everyone's operating with the same TTPs, with the same policies, right? Because then you can couple together, very quickly multiple agencies that need to be involved to make a decision or whatever, because it's like all the same protocols. Even if it's a phone call, worst case, you could say the right things on that phone call for them to go, yep, yeah, you guys are good, or whatever there. That's just, all of that is going to speed things up versus slowing it down, right? So that's great. All right. Well, I'm going to pull up my good friend Zev Nadler. He asked a good question. This is going to shift gears slightly from where we were at with FIFA, but I think it's a great question. He said, going back to DJ's comment on data centers, are most data centers considered critical infrastructure? And can they apply for more active ways to detect, track, and possibly mitigate? And what does that application process look like? And I'll throw in even airspace restrictions, the UAFRs. Like, could they be eligible for airspace, restrictions over data centers, along with all this? But what are your thoughts on that whole world?
They will. So under the IT section of the 2209 NPRM, data centers are specifically spelled out in that. So data centers can, if this rule goes forward, Zev, then they'll be able to actually, that same application process. But I encourage anybody that is a data center, look at the requirements so that's required before you can apply. So you have to have a guard force on the ground. You have to have security measures in place. You actually have to have remote ID in place. You have to be able to show need based on remote ID interceptions across the board. And then you have to be able to have security protocols in place. And I think, and this is DJ speaking, I don't know if this is actually their thought process. I think they wanted to make sure you were putting a little bit of skin in the game before you asked for an airspace closure. Michelle's nodding her head, so that's obviously, I was right. They want to know that you care about it enough to put enough, invest your own money into this thing before you ask for an airspace closure. Because we all know airspace closure is not going to stop a drone flight. It's just going to be a visual, area that they're not supposed to enter. But yeah, they are specifically labeled. As far as the abilities, Zev, they're still narrowly scoped to do passive. SLTT, absent the folks that have been through Incutsi, SLTT and critical infrastructure are in the same canoe, rowing in the same direction. We're just trying to get beyond passive to more advanced DTI and some sort of mitigation. And in what, in my mind, I think will be soft cyber takeover. I think that's the most palatable way to go about it. But hope I answered that question.
Oh, that's great. Michelle, I think you wanted to. I was seeing your note. If you want to jump in, shift gears. I know that the hat that DJ's wearing today is more so coming from like the drone responders perspective, in some of his past work. But yeah, toss out your question.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of slide into the fact that you are now in the public sector. You're in industry. You're out here in the wild with the rest of us, and I'm sure, like me, it gave you an appreciation for a whole lot of stuff that you didn't know. And the learning that has happened for me has been incredible. And I'm assuming the same for you. So within the context of all of this that we're discussing today, do you see a path for industry to be able to do something to be able to help this problem that we have with SLTT authorities? And I'll leave it just really broad like that. It can go in any direction, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think shared voice is a huge part of it. I think we both want the same things. We want to look at the airspace above us. We want to be able to track things through our airspace for the same reasons. If I know it's there, then I can obviously change my security posture and address that issue there. SLTT standpoint is if I can't see it and track it, then I can't stop the threat. One of the things I will say about being on this side of the fence, and I've only been over here technically since September, I officially retired in November, is things do move a little faster, which I do like that aspect of it, because they have a business need to make sure it moves faster over here versus, I'm not saying the government doesn't, but the government has a few more layers in there of approval and this, that. They're more apt to make quick decisions in the private sector. But yeah, Michelle, I still see it. I think our voices can be together to actually push for the same airspace consecurity or whatever you want to call it. I think airspace awareness, a win for private industry is a win for SLTT as it comes to sharing that data. If I think my request of Congress was always every dollar you invest in counter US detect, track, identify, ask for that data back. So if you invest, $250 million more dollars, take that data that those are going to produce and put them into this national airspace picture. And I have this corny statement I used to talk about, the light in the warehouse. Every light in the warehouse that comes on makes that warehouse a little brighter. So every system that goes online, whether it's in New Mexico or Montana, which is probably not Montana, but any large city that puts it up, now we've got a larger picture of the airspace. And if we can put that into the national airspace picture, then UTM has a better chance of survival and moving forward quicker. So public-private, yeah, absolutely. I know there's going to be parts of SLTT and public safety that we can't put out there. There's going to be sites within the private industry that we don't want shown that it's a site, because we know that there are people around the world that target certain facilities like data centers or chemical factories or power stations and all that. But I think Michelle, our problem is you and I think way too logically about things, and we realize this problem is not that hard a problem to solve if you just put the right stakeholders at the table. And as Tanya, I can't remember her last name, we used to be with the FAA. She said, yes, suck the oxygen out of the room. Get the right people at the table that are willing to make the moves and actually make it happen. And I think we can solve this problem yesterday. But we just got to be able to move a little more agile with this. And I think that's why Trump, understanding business, knows that business has to move quicker, and government just doesn't move that quick. But I think there's a space that we can fix this problem. And I love being over here, man. I tell you, I miss the government side. I miss the folks. I miss the job. I'm given a mission over here now that I can still serve others, and I really do like that. That's been a more of a blessing to me than probably anything else.
Yeah, that's what I found as well. I just can't believe how much I'm able to enjoy helping people now in a different way. It's awesome. Data sharing. So I know that when I was an aircraft dispatcher and I was sitting at an AOC, I had a direct connectivity to the FAA 10th floor to be able to bring in federal law enforcement as needed. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're missing this aspect. I mean, sitting at the command center, we had the den, right, for the FAA. So all of the national players, all the Fed players were on board with all the airlines. We've got, because we have kind of talked about this, and we keep using the term UTM and drones are different. And I think we're missing that one piece of connectivity, not on purpose, but because it's really hard to figure out. How do we enable the intelligence that's gathered by industry, drone industry? How do we leverage that in a way that is actually consumable and actionable by law enforcement, by SLTT, without overwhelming them? I don't know the answer to that, but there's got to be a there. So it can't be just that counter UAS is going to do its own detection, and commercial operators, your Amazon package delivery, they're going to do their own detection. And at some point, we have such a redundancy, and we're already tight on cash. We're already trying to figure out this public-private partnership and dual governance scenario that we've never had to do before. I think there's an opportunity. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I agree with you 1,000%. If we put the right people around the table, we would absolutely be able to figure it out.
And there's precedent for this. So I'll go back to just the wiretaps in general. Back in early 2000s, they came up with what's called J standard data. So CALIA came up and said in the engineering section at Quantico, they said, look, we need to come up with one standard for all telcos to produce the data. Okay, so we want J standard data coming from every telco. So the federal government pushed money into these telcos at the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars to say, we want you to build to this standard. So come up with a standard for the data instead of having all these silos and different data points, so that all this data comes in and then we can use it as we see fit as far as pushing it out there. So there is precedent for that as far as standardization. I'm not a big fan of regulation and standardization, but in that case, as critical as that is, all the airspace data comes into one spot. And now we all have this big picture at the federal level and at the state level that we can see everything aloft. Mm-hmm. So that DFR programs can go further than a couple miles. They can go, 6, 8, 10 miles, because the technology is getting that advanced now where we can do longer duration flights and do more with them. So I don't want to prolong that thought, but I think there's a good example and many, many, many more that we've done this before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of a soapbox I end up getting on that you guys probably heard from me already is like, I could see as folks get more access to the FAA radar data for aircraft, that are flying up higher, use high resolution radars, other sensors at the critical, takeoff landing points and kind of high density areas, more high traffic areas to deconflict between everything, between eVTOLs with people in them, drones. I mean, even a flock of birds, God forbid, like a eVTOL runs into that, it's like in that really kind of high density, like more risk, I think, factors right there in that little bubble, kind of the bubble behind Michelle. If we can cover that, really, really, really well, high resolution, and get these aircraft up and out into maybe other bigger coverage, like federally covered, maybe radar coverage or ADS-B or whatever else, they could fly so much further without having to outfit every single square inch of the low altitude urban environment. At least that's my personal vision for it, or just thought.
Yeah, Dave, one of the things is going to have to be rethought of. We're going to have to rethink the whole registration thing. Okay, so I know minis are not supposed to be registered. They don't have to register. We got to rethink that because registration triggers remote ID. Okay, so we have got to. It's gonna upset some hobbyists. But I think if it leaves the ground, we have to have it registered and transmitting something. The thought process was, I think, originally Mavic Minis, and Michelle can correct if I'm wrong, but Mavic Minis didn't produce enough kinetic energy to cause an issue with a manned aviation. We saw the tanker in California, it did. It took it out of the air. Okay, so although it may not be a popular thing, we have to, I think if we can't see everything aloft, because what's the most prolific drone around are the cheaper drones. People aren't buying the $4,000, $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 drones. Although I was told last night that they intercepted a kid with a Skydio X10E down in Houston. I guess the game one. I'm like, that's got to be some really nice parents. So, I love my kids, but I didn't love them that much. So I'll jokingly aside, but we're going to have to rethink the registration thing, Dave. I think we've got to know everything that's in the air. If we don't, we're not going to be able to deconflict.
Yeah, wasn't there just a reprieval on on that for the minis that the FCC has even bought in off. So this is a much deeper problem, and we know that operationally, those tiny ones can do a significant amount of damage. It's not the kinetic damage that is the only risk.
Totally. Surveillance, other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, cyber intrusion. We've seen them use the cyber intrusion, for sniffing devices. So yeah, 100%.
Not just that, too. The lithium batteries on a lot of the drones. If you have a site that has a lot of volatility, even if a hobbyist has one of those blow into one of those sites, it could cause a lithium fire. So people don't really think about that, but even a hobbyist unintentionally could cause huge damage.
The crazy thing about the sensor we have in downtown Richmond, we used on the DHS test, it's still there. The most egregious flights were the smaller ones for altitude violations, like 1,300 feet in the air. And I'm thinking it had to have taken at least 75% of the battery to get up to that altitude. And did it tumble to the earth?
Yeah, now what?
Yeah. Well, Michelle, we have what, a minute or two, but I'm curious because you're doing a lot of work with the EIPP, projects, right? Where they're looking at vertiports at major cities, major port authorities, and enabling this future of EV tolls, electric vertical takeoff and landing. The future people inside of a drone, basically, right? Is the way I'm kind of thinking of it. Do you feel like that's bringing synergy, almost tying the loose ends together? That's, in terms of like literally putting a person in a drone. But it just like ties the whole thing full circle regarding everything, the risk, the necessity of policy, the necessity of all the things we just talked about. But in a nutshell, in a minute and 60 seconds, what's your take on that? That might be an interesting topic for another time. But.
I think we should, absolutely, because there's a whole lot that we could get into on that. We already have a very decent level of highly automated aircraft flying in our skies right now that have people flying them and passengers in the back. The autopilot technology today is awesome. So we already have that. The eVTOLs are introducing another power source with a different performance envelope and a different way of thinking about the performance of that aircraft and the safety features of that aircraft. Obviously, the hazards of a battery. Advanced air mobility is also bringing people closer to understanding that advanced air mobility is, in fact, drones, as well as eVTOLs. We've got Wisk, who is, they're proving the point right now. They are going straight to fully autonomous aircraft. They're not putting somebody in the cockpit to fly it. So they are literally making that bridge a reality. So yes, I do think it's helping. I'm watching the different teams as they think through challenges that we heard about early on in the early days of drones, back when the Predators were coming back. So, we are coming full circle, and the level of maturity of these conversations today is so much higher. So I'm very confident that we'll get some goodness out of the EIPP programs. They're all very serious. They're all very organized. They're putting their use cases down on paper. They're getting market value. They're getting the economic values all documented. They're going to do something, and we're going to learn from them. So I'm very positive about them.
Yeah, that's a good preview into our next one of our next calls. Right on, guys. Well, thanks for your time, and for each of you carving out the time to be here and share your knowledge with the world, moving the needle forward. And thanks for what you both do in the industry, coming from almost like putting in your time with MITRE and with Virginia State Police, and then coming over here to, I don't want to say the dark side, the bright side, the other side of the coin, and bringing that wealth of wisdom, because we need it. You just said it, Michelle. It's like we needed that level of maturity. We needed to be ready, poised for this administration to just be like rapid fire. We're just going to put all the policies out and just let you guys, work around them and work through them. And I think it's exciting. At least they gave us the shot, but we got to be ready for it. We got to show up with a good plan, right? So anyway, thanks again. Thanks Zev and Zachary and the folks out there that were listening in and interacting. And we'll see you again next time on This Week in Drones.